invite you to turn to Isaiah chapter 11 or follow along on the screen. We're going to read this prophetic word from Isaiah chapter 11, verses 1 through 10 this morning. A shoot shall come out from the stump of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. The Spirit of the Lord shall rest on him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord. His delight shall be in the fear of the Lord. He shall not judge by what his eyes see, or decide by what his ears hear. But with righteousness he shall judge the poor, and decide with equity for the meek of the earth. He shall strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall kill the wicked. Righteousness shall be the belt around his waist, and faithfulness the belt around his loins. The wolf shall live with the lamb, the leopard shall lie down with the kid, the calf and the lion and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them. The cow and the bear shall graze, their young shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like the ox. The nursing child shall play over the hole of the asp, and the weaned child shall put its hand on the adder's den. They will not hurt or destroy on my holy mountain, for the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. On that day the root of Jesse shall stand as a signal to the peoples. The nations shall inquire of him, and his dwelling shall be glorious. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Well, we're in week 2 of our journey, our Advent journey, and on any journey, I think it's fair to ask questions that come up along the way. A number of questions come up on our journeys when we travel to and from to see families. And last night we were near Nashville visiting with some best extended family, and it was good, kind of that once a year thing when you get together and you're kind of family for once a year, and then you just go your separate ways 364 days out of the year. We had a similar situation a couple weeks ago, and on the way back to Calvert City, I took the exit at Calvert City, the one, I think it's 27 maybe, the one with Loves and that exit. And so for whatever reason, I turned left, and that was not where we lived. When I got off the exit, and Beth was like, "Where are you going?" And so that question was kind of rooted in certainty. She was asking where I was going, and my best response was, "I don't know." And so she asked that question, even though she knew the answer. It was a question rooted in certainty, and she knew full well that I was not headed to our house, so I had to kind of do a U-turn. I don't know if that's legal in Calvert City, but telling on myself a little bit. But went back to home, and that question was rooted in certainty. There are other questions on the journey that I think are rooted in uncertainty. I think kids, when we travel with them, a lot of times they want to ask this question as if they don't really know the answer, but this question that comes up a lot, are we there yet? Now, from a kid's viewpoint, I think that's a question of maybe legitimacy, like, are we really there yet? But kids, I just want to put this out there for you. If you ask that question, are we there yet? And we're still in the car, and we're still moving, I just want to tell you that we are not there yet, all right? So there's no need to ask that question when you're traveling with your parents or grandparents, are we there yet? Like, unless you just want to get out while the car is flying down the road and imagine that that's your destination, that's the only exception that we might be there yet. Otherwise, stay safe in the car and don't worry about asking if we're there yet, because we're not if the car is moving. Fair enough? On that journey I told you about last week, whenever we went with a family and extended friends' families to Washington, D.C., I told you about the ugly van that I got sick in, and then we knew we were on the journey for the rest of the week. Well, it occurred to me that I think actually on that same journey, there was this other question that was rooted in uncertainty. This was legitimately a question of uncertainty in my own mind. And I guess I'd never traveled so far away from Tennessee up until this point when I was a kid. But I kept seeing every 5 or 6 exits, every 5 or 6 miles, another Waffle House. And to me, that was kind of an indication that I'm not really sure we're making progress on our way to Washington, D.C. So from the back of the ugly van, I asked my dad this question. I was like, "Dad, are we getting there? Are we on our way? Is this the right way?" Because I keep seeing the same Waffle House over and over and over. And they realized that was just a common thing that you see on the interstates. And me being my sheltered self, I didn't realize that there were so many of them. They were so prevalent all across the interstate system. And so he just assured me that we were on our way, we were making progress. And And I just needed to be quiet and not worry about who was driving and whether we were making our way. I think sometimes it's that sense of security that kind of tells us to go back, right? We're venturing into unfamiliar territory, and sometimes questions arise when that happens. The Israelite people, think back to the Old Testament, they were people who were wandering through the wilderness for a period of time, and they also had some uncertainty in their own lives and began to ask this question, isn't it better if we just go back? Isn't it better if we just go back? And sometimes I think the questioning part can be connected to the desert part, the wandering part of our spiritual journeys. We have to ask the question, do we keep going on? Do we keep pressing onward? Or do we just get off the ride altogether? Should we get off the journey? Maybe you're asking that question today. Should you get off a particular journey you're on? The journey that you share with people, the journey that you share with a church family, the journey that you share on a particular board or area of service in your life. And you ask yourself this desert kind of question, is it time for you to get off the train? Is it time for you and your journey to end? In Isaiah chapter 11, we see that King Ahaz, king of Judah, was kind of in this desert wandering time of his life in his service to the people of Israel, a time when they were questioning. And they pretty much had this kind of either or option before them. They could trust in the countries and the political alliances that were around them, or they could continue to trust in this Yahweh who had time after time delivered them from their enemies, and it delivered them from a life of no hope. Isaiah kind of conveys to us Israel and Judah's lack of trust in God, and it meant almost for them total destruction. Isaiah kind of paints this picture that indicating that their life would be in total ruin. First the kingdom of Israel in the north, and later some 140 years later, the southern kingdom of Judah would be destroyed in 587 BC. And for the people of Israel, they were at a time when they kind of had these ideal, perfect expectations of what their future looked like. And I bet many of us at this time of season especially have these hopes, and maybe they're not just hopes, maybe they're ideals that we put in our own head and we imagine a future that looks a certain way. Everything's got to be just right with our decorating, everything's got to be neatly presented under the tree, and we have an order of days that plays in our own minds, and we hope that everything plays out just according to our ideals and our hopes. And this message of doom was not really one that the people of Israel received very well. It was one that the prophet Isaiah boldly declared, and yet it didn't match up with their ideals, their long-term future of what God had promised, and their understanding of what hope looked like for them. We shared in the children's moment earlier kind of this hope that's described in chapter 11, and Adam Hamilton. If you're not joining us on Wednesday night, we're kind of profiling the journey according to Adam Hamilton, and he visits some of the Holy Land sites and talks to us about the cultural context that is available and that kind of brings to light some of these prophecies from the Old Testament especially. And in Isaiah chapter 11, verse 1, we hear that a shoot will come out from the stump of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of its roots. That second word, that branch that we translate as branch as such in the English New Testament, shall grow out of his roots. That branch is the Hebrew word netzer. And for them, it was perhaps a symbol of hope. Now, if you think of that Hebrew word netzer, what does that sound like? Well, it sounds like the hometown perhaps of Mary of Nazareth. And perhaps later settlers descended upon a sleepy town of 100 or so people, and they held on to such a hope as rooted in Isaiah chapter 11, verse 1, this netzer, and formed a community of people who put their hope in Yahweh, who put their hope in the promises of God. We don't know that for sure, but I think and you could make a compelling case that perhaps that is the way it would have happened. And Netzer, this town of Nazareth, perhaps named after Netzer, was one very unassuming town. I mean, later in the New Testament, we hear the apostle, the prophet, or the disciple Nathanael respond when he hears about Jesus coming from this town of Nazareth, and Nathanael's response is, "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" How would you like it if you traveled the state and you heard, "Can anything good come from Calvert City, Kentucky?" You'd be offended, right? This is our home. This is the place where we live, where we raise our families. And yet this was perhaps an early community of faith that assembled around a single hope in a solitary person who would deliver them from all the ills of the world. I think Isaiah would want us to know and realize that the Advent people are that we're pursuing and trying to become are people who hope long-term and hope in tomorrow. We have hope in the present, yes, but somehow we have to have optimism and longing for the future, that tomorrow is going to be better than today. And it's probably not going to be because of our own gifts and our own giftedness, but it's probably going to be in a hope that extends beyond ourselves, a capacity beyond ourselves. And no one kind of paints this future better than the prophet Isaiah. I just want to hear the futuristic terms that are rooted in Isaiah chapter 11. We hear these words: a shoot shall come out, a branch shall grow, the Spirit shall rest. He shall judge, the wolf shall, the leopard shall, and a little child shall lead them. As people of hope, we must be mindful of our shared future. We must be mindful of where our journey is headed and where our journey is going. The message of hope is rooted not necessarily only in the present in Isaiah, but it's a future hope in all things rooted in Christ, in this deliverer. And I just want to point out that I know sometimes hope is illogical and it's insensible. It doesn't make sense. Sometimes in the face of the reality that we experience, we hang on to promises of restoration and hope that are received in the most unlikely of circumstances. Sometimes we long for a greater sense of hope in the worst periods of ruin, in times of the greatest remorse, in times of the worst destruction, in times of the greatest violence. We see oftentimes that this is the most enduring time when hope is needed in our very lives. The times when we don't know if we can go on. And so just think about the prophecy that's offered from this prophet Isaiah in chapter 11. It's kind of a pairing of things that absolutely have nothing, seem to have, according to our understanding, nothing to do with the other. In Isaiah chapter 11, we hear, the wolf shall lay with the lamb. Now, you may have heard songs, and growing up, you may have heard other animals. And I just want to allow us to have a Bible lesson here for a moment, that when we sing about the lion and the lamb, that's not exactly scriptural. When we sing about the wolf and the lamb, that would be scriptural, but we don't really sing about that. This actually is the wolf and the lamb, not the lion and the lamb. Sometimes we get our Bible stories from Daniel and so forth mixed up in other parts of Scripture, and somehow they come to us in forms of song where we need to do a little fact checking. But nevertheless, this is the wolf and the lamb. And we also hear the leopard lying down with the kid, the calf lying and fatling together. And the nursing child shall play over the hole of the asp. What's an asp? That's not a word that we use, ASP. But an asp is none other than some sort of poisonous snake. And so these two things that seem to have nothing to do with each other are presented to us in the form of prophecy in Isaiah chapter 11. I mean, we all know what would happen if a child were to play near a poisonous serpent, right? No parent would ever do that, because we know what could potentially happen. We know the dangers that are presented in that. And so yet we have this prophecy presented to us in the form of opposites in Isaiah chapter 11. And so where are you in your spiritual journey? Where are you in the journey of life? Where are you in the journey of faith? Do you find yourself in the wandering part, the questioning part? Or do you find yourself in a place of hope where you see yourself moving more fully and fully into the image of God that God created us to be? What does this mean for us in our real lives? What would the analogies be in 2019 in Calvert City, Kentucky that would make us understand the full magnitude of what Isaiah is saying? What would be the things in our lives that we know don't go together, that would bring this home and help us understand. During the past few decades, we've had, and some of you are more fully aware of the gang violence and the allegiances that are portrayed in various gangs across the country. Oftentimes, these are unfortunate situations where people who are growing up have no role models, and so they find appropriate role models according to their understanding at the time, and in older friends and would-be role models who lead them down wrong paths. Perhaps what Isaiah would offer to us today is that this is a time when there might be friendships and allegiances and peace between gangs such as the Bloods and the Crips. A time when we might see reconciliation between people such as Amber Geiger and Brant John. People who had seemingly nothing in common. Perhaps when we think about 4 weeks ago, a shared peace between Mormon sects living along the Mexican-U.S. border and the drug cartels running the highway systems all around them. If you need another example, maybe we see this every single day. Maybe we might even experience a time of peace and friendliness between Democrats and Republicans on Capitol Hill. Times when we expect no peace. Party allegiances when we expect that they're only going to continue to worsen. And yet these outrageous yet promised examples are the hope that is found in Isaiah chapter 11. It's a promise of assurance when none should be there. We're really talking about the up and in for the down and out, the hope for the hopeless. And we see examples all around us, even in our own context, in our own lives and the lives of other people, when we can find hope in seemingly hopeless settings, hopeless environments, and hopeless outlooks. We're going to try something. I don't know if this is going to work beautifully, but we're kind of doing a little makeshift video presentation. And as this video cues up, I just want you to think about where hope can be found and how unlikely its existence can be in these settings. All right, so as the band comes forward, I just want to remind us that we don't all serve prison sentences of 60 years for manslaughter. Sometimes we subject ourselves to a sentence of another kind. It's maybe a sentence in our mind, a sentence of not being good enough, a sentence of despair, because we forget that our context is far beyond what we can physically see. And that prisoner found hope in the most unlikely of settings.